Was it Marvel when Jim Shooter was editor-in-chief? Was it Marvel when DeFalco was? When they sold it to these guys, or when they sold it to those guys? You know, the company that you go in that you think you're working for hasn't existed for years anyway. And as freelancers, you know, you go where the work is. And so, yeah, it's fun to be at Marvel, but it's fun to be at DC too, and you need to do that to survive in the business. I will say one more quick thing that I think was really important about Marvel in the 80s, which was the Epic line, which was
Archie Goodwin's line.
Archie Goodwin's line. It was groundbreaking. For me personally, as a writer, that's where I did Moonshadow, a book that completely changed my creative life and my career. Thank you for
The one Moonshadow reader is right there.
Brand new edition, just came out from the Dark Horse last Wednesday. But really, those books were really groundbreaking. They were like Vertigo before Vertigo. And Archie and Martin Clark and Murray Sutton and Dan Chichester, all the people there. So it wasn't just superheroes coming out of Marvel in the 80s. There was a lot of really interesting, offbeat, groundbreaking work.
And I think Archie Goodwin, who is, I think, universally renowned as the greatest editor Marvel's ever had, an editor in Marvel, or editor for comics, really, period. On top of that, being the writer himself.
Yeah. And a hell of a nice guy.
Yeah.
And we're going to turn this into the Manhunter panel in a minute.
Yeah.
And the nicest guy.
Yep.
And went on again after I've been going back to DC and running some of the greatest 90s DC books that were coming out at the time too. Now, my memory serves that you had great runs on Avengers with Joe Sinnott.
Yeah.
Later on West Coast Avengers, I believe Sinnott was still working here on that.
Yeah, anything to disguise my work. Joe was, I was doing breakdowns, which are basically the coloring book version. You do the storytelling, composition, but a lot of the, fine line detail and the spotting of blacks, the black shadows and all that, was the ink. I'd get paid a little less, the ink would get paid more. And Sinnott, one of the supreme pros in the business, one of the best inkers ever. For some people, the best inker ever. Would make I always marveled at it, so to speak, because he took my stuff, which I always found flaws with, and many others do too. But he would take it and make it look absolutely professional and solid, and I love that about him. I just saw him at a convention, the East Coast convention, a couple weeks ago, and he's still hanging in there. He's 96. He's drawing. He says, "Well, Al, it's hard for me to walk anymore." I said, "Me too, Joe." But he was real happy to see me, and I was thrilled to see him again. So.
And then you also had your run on as writer and artist on Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man, creating, I think, one of the most Spider-Man villains that were created in the 80s, the Spot.
My favorite. Yeah. I know. I love that character just because he's just a Warner Brothers cartoon waiting to happen. When I did it, I thought my inspiration was Bugs Bunny taking his rabbit hole and moving it in places, and then a few years after I actually did that character, I saw an old Warner's cartoon where there was a mad scientist. It wasn't Bugs Bunny or any of the regular characters, but he created a formula where he had holes that he could put anywhere and travel through them, and then reach his hand out and take them away. And I said, well, I guess I ripped that off, but I never had remembered seeing it previously. So whatever. But I think actually he's a character with potential that Marvel's never made use of. I thought he'd be kind of a cool hero. And by the way, my sense of humor. Do you know anybody familiar with that character at all? Yeah. Do you remember the name of his secret identity? It's Jonathan On. O-H-N. Johnny On the Spot. I wasn't editorial for nothing.
And again, also as editor, longtime editor on Marvel Fix There. And then, JM, I remember from Defenders, a long run of Captain America with Mike Zeck, later on Craven's Last Hunt, and what you already mentioned, your run on Moonshadow, which was mind-blowing, to a pretty mediocre teenager in the 1980s. I certainly appreciate that as well. Thank you. And was there anything else that I failed to mention that you think garners a mention?
That's enough for now.
Well, I would like to say about Rick Leonardi, that he came in with some very nice samples, but they didn't look like, professional comics. I thought they looked like sort of underground comics. And I was saying, listen, I was about to throw them out the door, saying, hey, keep in touch. I like what you're doing. I'm sure we can develop something, when your work gets a little more Marvel-like. And before I let him go, I took the samples and showed them to Shooter and to Jim, to Jim's, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Office.
No, not office.
Natatorial.
No, in praise of Jim, he said, don't let this guy leave without a plot. And I don't think we had a plot, but within a very short period of time, Jim saw enough in his stuff also to say, look, we got to develop this guy. So a little something. Shooter sometimes gets vilified, but he had some good instincts and some good ideas.
He was great.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Well, a lot of ways he was very great, and I got along with him.
For the first half of the '80s, he was Marvel.
He was.
He's the one that kept the trains going.
Well, when you said, he would get people to do inventory work. Because at that time, Marvel was missing deadlines left and right, and at the last minute, they'd have a reprint issue or some awful other thing, mostly reprints was the big bang. And he, to his credit, that's what I wanted to say about Rick, but, pardon me.
It's getting all choked up.
But yeah, you're right. But he would old guys who weren't working in the business anymore, new guys, he'd get everybody to do inventory issues, usually with more than one character, so that if it had Spider-Man, Captain America, and the Thing, in an emergency, you could use it as an issue of Spider-Man, or the Fantastic Four, or a Marvel team-up. And he found ways, that these things would be, multi-purpose fill-in issues, and it really did help make the trains run on time and get the copies. Because Marvel was losing a ton of money with overtime charges and late charges from the printers, who were the ones who really ran the business apparently. So, but they had a schedule to keep, and if we didn't make our deadlines, they would charge us extra money. And in this way, he made Marvel much more stable and much more profitable, and that benefited all of us.
Well, and another kind of innovation I think that even laid at Shooter's feet is the miniseries. I mean, after those 5 or 6 inventory issues that I mentioned that I'd done, I went on to the Division Scarlet Witch miniseries, which is 4 issues, a completely discrete standalone story. And from there to 4-issue Broken Dagger, first appearance, which was a completely discrete standalone story. And had those miniseries, had that format not existed, I'm not sure it would have really fit in very well with the ongoing continuity of the regular monthly, inventory books that Marvel was putting out at the time. So that was another one of Shooter's little innovations. The next innovation of his that I was a direct beneficiary of was in the mid-'80s when they decided, the top line books, X-Men and so forth, when they decided to do bi-weeklies in the summer. They went to a 15-issue schedule. The regular guys at the time couldn't handle that accelerated tempo. So that, again, opened the door for guys like me. So I went from Cloak and Dagger to X-Men. Wow. Not many, but they were there, and they were X-Men. And that was exposure for me and a lot of fun. And again, it was toying with formats, it was experimenting with getting more people onto the firing line, and that's the kind of thing that Shooter was good for.
He also created the big event with Secret Wars. I mean, that was before
Yeah,
Crisis on Infinite Earths. I mean, that
led to that.
We've all been, on some level, paying the price for it since then, but that was a big deal. Because now it's a big event every 30 seconds. Then it was actually an event.
Well, yes. But I think also Bill Mantlo did that, yes, the
It
contest
was
of
like 3
champions.
issues of it, wasn't it? But Secret Wars was big.
It was much bigger, obviously, extrapolate.
And I think Crisis on Infinite Earths was like DC going, we just did this big thing, we should do something big like that too.
Right.
And that's what created the whole event.
The escalating arms race we
Exactly.
find ourselves in today.
But Shooter deserves a lot of credit. You know, we all butted heads with Shooter at some point, but he was a really good editor-in-chief.
Do you think it was a matter of fixing things so much, getting them working as close to perfectly as an imperfect enterprise as comic books can be, and then continuing to fix what isn't broken? That led to, I think, conflicts later on. Again, I wasn't there. I'm not speaking from knowledge or experience, just kind of what I've heard over the years, that it got to be contentious to the point where eventually he was replaced by Tom DeFalco.
I think that Jim had a very specific point of view about how comics should be done. And while he was fixing the deadline situation, he didn't really have time to enforce that. But once that was it was the blessing and the curse. Once we all got caught up and everything was coming out pretty much on time, then he wanted to make everything perfect as he saw it perfect. And there is no perfect, A. And B, he had, most of his basic ideas were reasonable and, acceptable. But he had quirks that were very, specific to his personality. I remember one time we had a conversation and he said, when I was a kid and I saw a comic like where Dr. Doom was looming over the city and the Fantastic Four are walking, heads bent and all, I thought in that issue Dr. Doom was going to turn into a giant. And that always bothered me. And you go, I was a kid. He was maybe a little younger than me, but I would see those issues. It never occurred to me for a minute that was if he had been a giant in that issue, I would have accepted that too. But I just thought, oh, that's a cool looking cover. What do they do this issue? Jim, and he had specific things about he didn't like limbs being cropped inside a panel border. So, if you draw a panel and a guy's arm is off to the side and it's cut off by the panel border, that always bothered him. He felt like the guy's arm had been amputated. And I said, Jim, that's insane. Nobody thinks that. I said, there's movies and TV where there's stuff beyond the border. This is all they're letting you see. But in his mind, it was, it was a problem. And there were other things. One time I tried to argue with him. Somebody else? I don't know. I can go on,
I think it's a shame.
and I do.
It's a shame that we're just getting to this at the end of the hour, because this is really,
Not while I'm on the panel, it's nice.
But the fact is that, Shooter saw himself at the end, I think, as a kind of last bulwark of good, solid storytelling, and how to do comics in a way that broadened their appeal and made them readable to the majority of people, the biggest possible readership. And in as much as he saw himself as the last guardian of a lot of those precepts and principles, he got a little militant. There's no question about it. At the same time, bear in mind, this is the guy who gave Todd McFarlane permission to run wild, and the same guy who gave Frank Miller permission to run wild. So he recognized innovation, and he recognized, the Mavericks, and gave them permission to go when he felt like they deserved it, and when he felt like they had absorbed enough of the correct way of doing things that they would go out and not hurt themselves running wild. I think a lot of the carping here about Shooter micromanaging are from people who couldn't tell a story in the first place.
And I think that was my hesitance in honestly bringing it up, because you hear two diametrically opposing stories without the kind of nuance there undoubtedly was.
Well, here's the deal. When someone is in any position of authority, when you're the editor-in-chief or the president or whatever it is, and you're the guy that has to make the decisions, by the nature of your job, you're gonna alienate half the people.
Right.
Because they're not gonna like the decision, and the other half will like it, and that's the way it works. And, you know, you could find people, whether it's your editor or your editor-in-chief, you know, editors that I love working with, someone else, I never work with that person again, you know? It's just the way it works. It's all about, you know, personal chemistry.
Do you think it ends up being a job with a shelf life?
Apparently.
Well, one thing I think that happens to everybody in that position, and I think it happened to Jim, is that the vocabulary changed. And it changed largely because of what was going on, but the way people could read comics altered, and also the clientele for comics was altering into fans who were very used to certain kinds of storytelling and to expanding the conventions. I think Jim's rules of thumb about what had to happen, you could see it when he did Defiant, that we did have small panels with small people in them with no cropping, etc. And the time had gone past when that was necessary for people to understand how a comic worked. And I think that kind of happens to everybody in a position of power, as sooner or later, the life moves on.
And I think it's up to
Just to sort of undercut what I just said, but to reinforce what Bob just said, a lot of this, and this would be really interesting masterpieces for somebody, but to look at the rise of MTV at the same time as an 80s phenomenon, and how that trained people's narrative sensibility, how it trained a generation to be able to tell a story from apparently unconnected imagery. Look at a lot of the early music videos, it's like, but kids eventually learn how to tell their own stories using images that were thrown up on a screen. So.
And again, I think we're right at about 3:04, unless there's something I've egregiously failed to mention, which I can only imagine I have. We can go ahead and wrap up. Are there any final thoughts, issues, concerns, or questions?
Well, I could go on, but I won't.
You should have your own TV show.
Yeah, that's
Well, guys, thank you so much.